Christopher Nolan wrote the script for Oppenheimer in the first-person point of view. This means,
so rather than say, Oppenheimer crosses the room, it says, I walk across the room in the present tense.
if you're not really interested in the technical side of screenwriting or filmmaking, you might be thinking, okay, who cares? And that's a completely valid thought to have. But for those of you who are familiar with how scripts work, you know that they have very rigid format and structure rules, one of them being that they should be written in third-person point of view. To be more specific, when we say that a script is written in the first or third person, we mean that its action lines are written in the first or third person. A typical screenplay structure relies on at least two types of writing, if you will. You have action lines and dialogue. Dialogue, which is formatted in a different way, centered, as you can see here, is what your characters are saying. Sometimes this can be voice-over narration, an internal monologue, or a typical conversation. Action lines, on the other hand, are basically any exposition that isn't dialogue. It's the bits of text that describe what happens or what a character does. In a normal script, this is usually straightforward. In this script for Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, for example, Cooper gets out of the truck, checks the flat, turns to Tom. This is an action line. It describes what's happening in the scene. Action lines, as a rule, are written in third person, given that this is probably the clearest way for a script to be written in order to make it easily translatable to the screen by a filmmaker. As an amateur writer myself, when I first heard that the Oppenheimer script had been written in first person, I was shocked and bewildered. I thought, what is quirky old Nolan up to this time? And I was excited to see what this meant. Excited to see a professional script for a huge movie tread such an untraditional path. And so after I watched the movie and thoroughly enjoyed it, I looked around for my old buddy Chris's script and I finally got to read it, preparing myself for a mind-blowing, game-changing experience. But it wasn't. The script read like any normal other script. I mean, obviously it was a great script, very engaging and well-paced, but I already knew that from the movie. But as far as the first-person aspect of it all, it was really not that different. For the most part, it felt like you could just switch out all the I's and my's in the action lines with he's and his's, and everything would have stayed exactly the same. To better illustrate that point, let's go through a simple example. Spoilers ahead, by the way, so be warned. Let's take one of the most personal, emotional scenes of the movie and look at how the first-person point of view writing affected it in the script. In this scene, Oppenheimer's wife, Kitty, finds him heartbroken and distraught. He has just discovered that Jean Tatlock, a woman he had been in love with but left to marry Kitty, had killed herself. Despite the scene being written in first person, we have no outwardly clear insight into Oppenheimer's train of thoughts. No in-depth expression of his emotions from his own perspective. Our only personal level insight into his emotions is present once in the line, "I look up ashamed," in the single word, ashamed. Did the first person writing affect the scene? As far as it is presented in the script, no. There's nothing here that couldn't have been written in third person. For something so simple and to the point, third person would have worked just as fine. Moreover, the scene starts off with action lines describing Kitty arriving on horseback, finding his horse, and then moving into the trees to find him, an account of events that Oppenheimer could not himself see, but is written in the first person nevertheless. Given how detached and impersonal this scene comes off in the script, what exactly was the point of writing it in first person? Did the first person point of view make it more personal? Did it offer internal insight into Oppenheimer's own voice that would have come off awkward in the third person? Let's look at a scene from another Nolan movie for comparison. I decided to go with Interstellar because I feel like that's one of the more emotional, more dramatic of the Nolan movies. Spoilers for this one too, obviously. In this scene, Cooper is pleading with his past self to listen to his daughter and stay home as opposed to going on this mission. He's desperate and hopeless, having lost decades of his children's lives, and he's basically speaking to himself, begging himself to stay. In the script, this scene is written in a mostly straightforward manner. Just like in Oppenheimer, things are described briefly and succinctly. We have no in-depth insight into Cooper's feelings. All we have is Cooper is crying with frustration, an almost impartial description of the situation from an outside viewer's perspective. Oppenheimer, despite being written in first person, is practically the same. Its emotional, deeply personal scene adds nothing in the script that Interstellar's emotional scene couldn't do in third person. In fact, you could switch out the first person pronouns for third person pronouns in the Oppenheimer scene, and things would not feel out of place. It would flow exactly the same in the same way the Interstellar script did. I've only shown you one scene from each movie, and a bit out of context, but those scenes should reflect enough of the general style of each script that it should show you that Oppenheimer, being written in the first person, did not really imbue it with such a depth of emotion or personality. In fact, it really didn't change much. And I know it may seem like I've been dissing Nolan all this time, like I'm trying to say, what's the point? What's the point of writing all of this in first person if it's just going to come off the same as all your other third person scripts? The answer to that question is pretty clear, but it took my smooth brain a lot of alone time processing the script to finally completely understand Nolan's thought process and its ramifications. Before we finally answer that question, though, we need to remember one thing. For starters, it's important to note that not all of the Oppenheimer script is written in first person. If you've seen the movie, you know that its events unfold in two separate time periods, which are intricately interwoven together. One follows Lewis Strauss in his Senate confirmation hearing, where he discusses his own involvement with Oppenheimer and the events leading up to him losing his security clearance. These black and white scenes are meant to portray an objective story. These scenes are written like a normal script, using the third-person point of view. The other time period follows Oppenheimer a few years prior as he recounts his life story to a personnel security board, who've gathered to decide whether he deserves to have his security clearance renewed. These scenes are presented in color and are meant to portray a subjective story, as seen through the eyes of Oppenheimer himself. In these scenes, Nolan opted to write in the first person. The whole objective versus subjective plotlines should alone make it clear why Nolan chose to write Oppenheimer's side of the story in the first person. Nolan wanted to portray a wholly subjective view of the events that happened during that time period, a view seen purely through Oppenheimer's eyes. I wanted to really go through the story with Oppenheimer. I didn't want to sit by him and judge him. This is a story that you experience with him. You don't judge him. You are faced with these irreconcilable ethical dilemmas with him. From the start, Nolan wanted to, in his own words, make it clear to anyone who read the script that we're on this ride with Oppenheimer. But if all that was true, if the usage of first person was meant to make us really be there with Oppenheimer, feel his position, feel the weight of those ethical dilemmas, those heavy situations, see what he saw the way he saw it, then why was the script still written in a straight-to-the-point, almost impersonal manner? To you, the answer to that question may be evidently clear by now, but as I mentioned before, it didn't click for me for a while. The first-person writing is not as personal as I would have liked it to be, simply because it just doesn't matter. The script didn't need to be super personal. It's a script. It needed to be straightforward, concise, and to the point. It needed to be written in a way that would be most easily translatable for the screen, and Nolan's brevity was the way to do it. It didn't matter if I wasn't seeing and feeling Oppenheimer's personality throughout the pages of the script, because I'm not meant to read the script, I'm meant to watch the movie, and I did get to see all of his personality and presence reflected subjectively in the actual movie. The script isn't for me. It's for the actors, the cast and the crew, and the people working on this production. It's a subtle but effective way to put them all in the mind of Oppenheimer, to influence every aspect of the movie to be an expression of his view of things, whether through the cinematography, the lighting, the editing, or most importantly, the acting. It didn't need to be too deeply emotional and personal because it still needed to be a concise, functional script. But Nolan took that extra step and wrote it in first person to immerse his cast, most prominently among them Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer's head. And from what you hear from the cast, it worked quite effectively. It made Cillian feel the weight of the responsibility of acting out the role of such a prominent figure in history. The usage of first person in the script provides his cast and crew with a level of immersion that allows them to sink into Oppenheimer's head, influencing everyone making the movie to paint it more heavily from Oppenheimer's perspective, which allows us to view the finished movie as Oppenheimer's story as he saw it, at least as far as the colored parts of the movie went. And in that regard, Nolan's unusual writing attempt was a huge success. The movie was expertly communicated in that way. It was Oppenheimer's life as he saw it, as he lived it. The script might not have been an overly emotional, overly involved, overly personal first-person account of Oppenheimer's life, but it didn't need to be. The movie needed to be that, and it did in fact manage to do so. And if Nolan's decision to write it in the first person aided in that process, then props to him. Okay, so that sounds like a good conclusion. I went from questioning Nolan's decision and criticizing it, to understanding his true intent behind it and appreciating its value. So you may be wondering why the video isn't over yet. Well, as I've said before, it took me a bit of processing to arrive to this conclusion in regards to Nolan's usage of the first person. To get here, I had to research his odd decision even more. I had to know if there were other popular scripts out there written in first person. I had to know if Nolan was truly the first quirked up white boy to attempt such a technique. And obviously, he was not. Apparently, there have been a few first-person scripts that have made it to production over the years. There are also some prominent, well-known ones that never ended up being produced. I needed to see for myself how personal these scripts were, and if their usage of the first person served a more functional role than what we got in Oppenheimer's script. Funnily enough, one of the first instances of first-person screenplay writing that I stumbled upon was from a movie I didn't even know existed, a video game movie no less. This was 2005's Doom. Based on the popular first-person shooter franchise of the same name, the movie wasn't much of a success. Why the fuck would this movie opt to use an experimental, untraditional type of writing in its script, you might be thinking? Well, Doom's scriptwriter, David Callahan, didn't use first-person all the way through. He used it in one kind of well-known sequence, a sequence where the movie basically turned into the video game and went full-on first-person shooter. For the most part, the sequence is pretty basic. It's written in first person because it's meant to be shot in first person. It's meant to put us in the protagonist's shoes fully and let us have a somewhat first-person POV video gamey experience. In practice, however, the script doesn't put a lot of personality or narrator individuality into its action lines. We do, however, have a couple of instances where the action lines seem to take on a more personal feel. One example is when our protagonist seems to be talking to himself. A sound from another side corridor. I spin, gun trained, nothing. Am I hearing things? Have I gone crazy? The protagonist's thoughts are then interrupted by a howl. In this instance, the script fully embraces its first-person perspective by making even the action lines reflect an inner monologue, even when action lines in regular scripts are meant to be more straightforward exposition of actions and events. This, and a few other examples, inject a bit more personality into the script by forcing us more squarely into the protagonist's mind. Given that this is an action line, it's a bit of information that we're not really going to explicitly see in the movie, at least not verbally. We're not going to hear the protagonist's inner monologue, because these thoughts are not communicated as monologue or dialogue in the script, but are rather shown to us in the action lines. However, the existence of this inner thought process in the script can influence the actor's behavior in the scene, and this, along with the cinematography, can lead to the concept being visualized in a more implicit way. While the final scene in the movie is different than the one in the script, I think this exact line is portrayed in one part of the sequence where Reaper turns around and shoots a bullet into a wall, only to be met with his reflection, which he ponders for a while. It visually communicates what the script's action line explicitly states. We can sense that the protagonist is for a second doubting his own sanity, surprised that he shot a bullet at nothing, at his own reflection. Clearly, the Doom movie isn't where one goes to learn more about the art of screenwriting, but its efforts with this one sequence were interesting, at least. Additionally, while reading through this sequence, I stumbled onto what may be one of the funniest lines I have ever read in a script ever, which describes the transition from the third-person objective view that the movie is normally in to the first-person shooter perspective that it becomes for this sequence. And just that fast, we are living the moment we've been waiting for, the moment we become John Grimm. Now we are the first-person shooter. Moving on from Doom, which only had a single scene written in first person, let's talk about a script that was in its entirety written in the first person. And this isn't just any script. This script was first on the Blacklist, a well-regarded annual survey of the most well-liked movie scripts that have yet to be produced, and was also a 2011 finalist for the Nicole Fellowship, a fellowship program administered by none other than the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the same people who run the Oscars. A Many Splintered Thing by Chris Schaefer and Paul Vickner follows a hopeless playboy screenwriter forced to write a rom-com movie while he himself falls in love with a taken woman, learning the meaning of love as he chases her and does everything to make her his. The script was later made into a movie titled Playing It Cool, starring Chris Evans and some other decently big names. The movie was ill-received by critics and mostly melted into obscurity, along with the dozens of early 2010 movies of the same genre. I didn't watch the movie, but I did read the script, even though a lot of it was changed for the final movie. To keep this video a little bit visually interesting, I'll be playing clips from the movie even though I'm strictly discussing the script. As far as the writing goes, this one actually was pretty unique, at least for a script. The first-person point of view writing adds a lot of charm and personality to the whole thing, particularly because it takes place from the perspective of our unnamed protagonist, the screenwriter, who is actually simply referred to as me throughout the movie. This sense of personality and individuality is very loud and distinct, with action lines like, "We hug. I'm barely holding my shit together." If you're watching this performance right now, Sir Ben Kingsley, you should be taking notes. "I see a box of Captain Crunch. That motherfucking captain is looking at me all wrong. I walk out to get some air. I need a moment, so keep your distance." You can watch this through the window. But more than just personality and a sense of first-person individuality, the script also flows really well, and its sense of personality is easily translatable for the screen because we have full access to the protagonist's thoughts nearly all the time due to the constant use of voice-over narration. So, while in the Doom movie, we had no way of actually listening in on the protagonist's inner monologue from the script as he wondered, "Am I hearing things? Am I going crazy?" In A Many Splintered Thing, we usually get narration that says more or less what the script's action lines already did, which means that even though the viewer of the movie doesn't have access to the script like us, they can still get insight into the protagonist's first-person thoughts and emotions because he ends up narrating them. What's the point then of writing in first person if you can just write the script in third person like any normal script and use voiceover narration to frame it from the perspective of that protagonist and paint it with his personality by doing that? I think it's mostly just an artistic choice. The script itself is very meta and incredibly self-referential. Since the script is written in first person, it's like the protagonist wrote the script itself. It's a rom-com movie screenplay about a screenwriter who wants to write a rom-com movie screenplay. It's full of fourth wall breaking humor. It's overall just a super quirky, multi-layered mess. I don't think the first person POV writing in the script ultimately matters in the context of the final movie, but I suppose it makes the script fun and interesting for prospective directors or producers who want to adapt it to the screen. It's fun and it flows well. It feels like you're reading a novel rather than a script, which makes it enjoyable. I think that charm is useful for a script when it wants to attract directors and producers and whatnot. Maybe it gives it more appeal and selling power. I've heard the term director bait thrown around, and I guess that makes sense for something like this. In conclusion, the first-person POV writing isn't exactly necessary to the story or to the movie in general, but it does make the script more appealing and ties the whole concept into a quirky, chaotic, layered bundle of self-reference, even if that quirkiness comes off annoying and overindulgent at times. Like, sometimes it definitely feels like the script is trying too hard to be cute, and it comes off painfully cringy. I mean, the script literally starts with "fade on in motherfuckers" and ends with "fade it out bitches." We even have a whole page before the script actually begins that describes it as a true interpretation of imaginary events that took place in my head, inspired by real events that happened to me and people I know, all of whom are liars. So while the script is appealing overall, the quirkiness is definitely a product of its time. The last script I want to talk about is perhaps the best example of first-person point-of-view script writing that I encountered. Passengers by G.J. Pruss is a sci-fi thriller type of script, written somewhere around the year 2000, based on the award-winning Robert Silverberg short story of the same name from 1968, not to be confused with the 2016 Passengers movie with Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt, which is completely unrelated. This script was apparently hot back in the year 2000 and had David Fincher attached to direct, but eventually faded away for some unknown reason. An article on the website Script Shadow, however, mentions in passing that it hasn't been made because the script's appeal doesn't translate to screen. The script certainly has appeal. Just like A Many Splintered Thing, this script is written entirely in first person, from the perspective of Charles Roth, a successful, high-functioning alcoholic playboy who is for the most part bored with life. In brief, and without getting into spoilers, it follows our protagonist as he comes to terms with the fact that some weird alien/bacteria/things that people call passengers have been possessing random people in short waves and taking them on debaucherous adventures filled with sex and violence, leaving them 1 to 3 days later with no recollection of what happened. These bouts of parasitic possession are referred to as rides, and ridden people are left traumatized and shocked, but nevertheless completely ignored by other people in society. Charles Roth is being ridden, and he's trying to adapt to that fact. Passengers is a kind of descent into madness, and the first-person writing allows us as readers to follow along in that journey with Charles Roth. The action lines here all provide deep, personal, individualistic insight into the character as we read his inner monologue, his thoughts, feelings, and reactions to what's happening around him. You end up with lines like, "Now concentrate, asshole, and do something brave, like get out of bed." And, "Shit, that's what I was afraid of. That's me." What are the odds of me catching another cab again? Not very good. Wait, there's one. 2 old ladies want it. Fuck 'em. I cut in front. I'm propped up and wait a minute. Where am I? Oh shit. And this one really cool example, which is unclear without context, but cool nevertheless. "So I'm punching you right in the face. You've been watching me this whole time and not doing anything about it." Passengers is a very interesting read that really captures your attention start to finish, and that's mostly because of the first-person writing. It puts you firmly inside the protagonist's head all throughout and lets you read through it with such smoothness that it feels like you're flowing through his stream of consciousness. But is there a valid reason for G.J. Pruss to have broken the norm and used first-person here? To a degree, Pruss utilizes this technique with more weight than Chris Schaefer and Paul Vicknair did in A Many Splintered Thing. It's a more integrated part of the story without having to rely on self-reference like A Many Splintered Thing did. In Passengers, as the reader of the script, you're put inside the head of a man who has what seems to be parasites inside his own head, as we ride him throughout the script, just like these passengers ride him in the actual story. It's also very meta, but the first-person writing here is much more serious and is more essential for us as readers to visualize and understand Roth's internal struggle with the passengers. Despite all of that, was the first-person POV actually a valid part of the script? Was it necessary for it? To me, that was a harder question to answer. The first-person POV here effectively turns the script into a book. It's a piece of writing that you can enjoy fully without needing to even translate it into film. And yet, at the same time, it raises the question of how can someone translate this for the screen? Both Passengers and A Many Splintered Thing were written completely in the first person. If A Many Splintered Thing managed to be translated to film, why can't Passengers? Well, unlike A Many Splintered Thing, Passengers does not provide us with voiceover narration that explains Roth's thoughts to the audience. As readers of the script, we can follow along with his inner monologue and get to know and understand him as a character. But since this monologue is present only in the action lines, a direct screen adaptation of the script would have to communicate them purely visually, which would struggle to be sufficient. Alternatively, the movie would have to introduce voiceover narration, meaning it would have to be integrated into the script, meaning you'll have a whole other script on your hands. This wouldn't be a very good move, given that voiceover is not a very well regarded practice in the medium in general. So, as a director who wants to use the Passengers script, you're faced with two paths. The first is you translate the script as is, and you suffer from a movie where you have a very silent protagonist, who you risk to be both unlikable and unrelatable, going through sometimes mundane situations and other times insane ones, but keeping his thoughts to himself. This possibly can be done in a way that's still engaging, but it would be incredibly difficult to do so without losing out on a more intimate aspect of the protagonist's internal struggle with these brain parasites. This struggle, which I thought was a very thematically crucial part of the story that we need to see. The second path a director can take is to, as I said before, integrate voiceover. But then you risk losing the original script's artistic integrity by making everything too heavy-handed and in your face. It makes sense that the script has been lying dormant for a while with no movie in sight, because while the script itself is super engaging, a screen adaptation feels really difficult. And this is, in turn, largely because Pross chose to write it in the first person. So, was the first-person POV writing actually important, and was it necessary for the script and the eventual movie? You could argue that the answer to that question is no, given that it only served to make the script more complicated and untranslatable, which is not at all something you want for a script. The main difference between a script and your average traditional novel or narrative is that a script is meant to tell a story for the screen. Passengers told a story, a very interesting one, but it made it incredibly difficult for it to be translated for the screen, which is arguably the most crucial aspect of any script. In that regard, you could argue that it failed as a script. On the other hand, the first-person point of view made Passengers so much more interesting and engaging, so much more personal and impactful. From an artistic standpoint, I really respect that decision, as it made for a script that really touched me. If I was a director worth my salt, I would want to try to translate the script, daunting as it may be, because it told an emotional story that resonated with me, and a large part of why it resonated was because it presented itself in the first person. At the end of the day, I think this is what most of these first-person scripts have in common. It's an artistic choice that, for better or for worse, gives your script more personality and makes it possibly more appealing to directors and producers. From a technical standpoint, is it crucial and worth the deviation from the norm? I don't think so, given that in instances like Passengers, it made itself untranslatable for the screen. On the other hand, in instances where the first-person writing was subtle, like in Oppenheimer, it didn't really affect the script's translatability, but served to make its creators more involved and immersed in the head of the character the movie was meant to portray. But even if first-person isn't technically crucial, do I still think it's cool nevertheless? Definitely. For something like Passengers, I think that one day a talented enough director will come, read Passengers, and really feel it. It'll touch them like it touched me, and they'll take on the challenge of trying to translate it to the screen. And hopefully, they'll be brilliant enough to do so effectively. Who knows? But until then, do I think we should see more scripts written in first person? Yeah, why the hell not? Let people express their art the way they want to. Okay, maybe not completely the way they want to. Thanks for watching this long, rambly, sometimes contradictory, oftentimes confusing video. I hope you enjoyed it at least a little bit, or maybe learned something new alongside me throughout this whole first-person script rabbit hole. I'll be attaching a link to a website where you can find the A Many Splintered Thing script. As for the Passengers script, that one was much harder to track down, and I'm not sure about the legality of sharing it here. But if you try hard enough, you'll find it through some thorough Googling. If you're interested, you can also easily find the original Passengers short story online. It's a quick read and also very interesting. Shout out to the website Script Shadow, a new place I discovered which reviews scripts. It's through a lot of Reddit browsing and referrals to this website that I managed to stumble onto A Many Splintered Thing and Passengers, and I found the website's review of these two scripts pretty nice. Links to those two are in the comments if you'd like to check them out. Anyways, thanks again for accompanying me on this journey and listening to me talk about this for so long. Scripts and screenwriting are very near and dear to my heart, so this was a fun topic to research and explore. This will be my last video of the year. I hope all of you are having happy holidays and some good time off. Here's to an at least more tolerable new year. I'll see you soon, but for now, take care and goodbye.